All right, hey Data Rockstars, welcome back to the channel. We are still doing Twitter. So last week we did Taylor Swift and we were looking at the Twitter data during the release of Midnights, which was a lot of fun. But today we're going to take Twitter data for two brands and use no-code AI tools to classify it and maybe look at some sentiment as well. So we're going to pop into that same tool we started with last week in Vicinitas in a second, but we're headed to Monkey Learn. So Monkey Learn is going to be some fun application of AI there. So we're going to download those brand tweets. If you don't have them already, if you do, awesome. We need two brands files of Twitter tweets of their tweets. So that's the second option here from their profile. What are the tweets and the attributes of those tweets? So go ahead and run that for two brands, click search, and then export to Excel. And you can get your 3,200 from Vicinitas. We don't need quite that many. It depends on the free account you have with Monkey Learn on what your max number of tweets are. But we're going to click search and export to Excel. So just checking the accurate data out here, a little cool word cloud, see what's popping in their tweets in their last few years of engagement. Looks kind of interesting. Here's the engagement summary. Looks like everyone's talking about it on Thursday nights. That's when they get excited about cars. Looks like the social media team is active in the mornings during the week. Maybe not on Wednesday. I think they're having a little hump day slump there, but on Mondays and Fridays. So if Taylor's boss, maybe everybody's staying late Thursday and you can sleep in the rest of the week, so forget that. But checking out what they have here. So this is really what I want us to drive to is a deeper conversation than just posts are performing better when pictures. Okay, what kinds of pictures? Or, could we make posts that are videos that perform even better? Like what types of videos? So I'm trying to take this information we have in the Twitter posts, in the language at least, and be able to classify those so we can drive the conversation deeper. So maybe posts about racing do well, and maybe posts about concept cars don't. So that at least gets us to the second layer of a question. So maybe why don't they for the concept cars? Maybe no one trusts them to launch them anymore. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. So it keeps driving you to the next question. So maybe the pictures aren't cool enough, or they don't have the people that look like they're having fun. So whatever it is, we're going to try to classify them into these different things so we can drive the conversation deeper and say what we want to, post more or less of. All right, so with that little preview, we have our accurate Excel file. I do want you to open up Excel, and depending on your Monkey Learn profile, how many free tweets you have, figure out how many rows that you're allowed to import into a model. So I have a 3,000 limit. So if that's the case for you, then the 3,200 is 200 too many, or it looks like I have 3,200 because the first row is a title. So I'm going to scroll up there. You can click Control down to go to the end of the screen in Excel if you want to start learning Excel keyboard shortcuts. So shout out to Miss Excel on TikTok or Excel Dictionary on Instagram if you want to learn all those shortcut keys. Right click and delete those, and go ahead and save this as something like accurate tweets shorts or something to let you know it's shortened. Maybe you want to keep the longer version for later. So, all right, that is good to go. Do the same thing with the other brand. But before I hop here into the AI tool to create a model and analyze those tweets, I really want to think about categories of posts in general. So I'm going to make a model for automotive, but that could apply to either Accurate or Lexus. So I don't want to be too specific, but I'm looking for categories, at least 4 or 5, probably like 6, 7, not too many to make it too complicated, but enough where I have distinct different types of posts so I can drive that conversation to where we're, more effective or less effective, and we can start to experiment with things and improve how we're posting, look at our content calendar, maybe mix things up. So looking at Accurate here, I'm seeing that first post is a concept car. Looks like one that may turn into an Acura ZDX next year, according to something I heard a few weeks ago that they announced. I'm a little skeptical, see what happens. We got one of their SUVs with a sport model. We've got the new Acura Integra that was announced and actually launched in the past year. Some vintage posts with the NSX that has completed. You have a few racing posts. And what else do we have? Another vintage NSX, one of the coolest cars of the early 90s. That was one of the first drivable supercars that didn't take a mechanic on it to fix it. And some excellent pixel art there. So it definitely has kind of a vintage play to it. There's some drifting in there. What else do they have? More racing concept cars. They definitely have a different vibe than just sometimes it's just pictures of the current lineup. They're kind of doing something a little bit different than marketing than I saw maybe 5 years ago. See if there's anything else. I'm just trying to get some inspiration because we're going to break these up into categories that I want to apply. So this looks like a real customer. So that's user-generated content. They often like try to ask for memories or places you've gone and pictures with your vehicle out somewhere like on California Highway 1 or other great drives of the world. Looks like another one with the new car, though, instead of an old one. So that's pretty neat. All right, so I think I got a little bit of an inspiration. But what we can look at, too, are lists of types of social media posts. So this is something you might see in a content calendar, so you can mix it up. So you're not posting, 20 race car pictures in a row, maybe, or 20 user-generated content posts in a row. Maybe you do that as a thread or something. But you want to make sure it's, got some sort of a variety. Maybe it's like, a certain one on Tuesdays, but maybe it's not that strict, but at least so you have it mixed up. But okay, these are the ones we can classify things into just as kind of an inspiration. Note there are also ones like customer service. Is it like a thank you? Is it, product help? Is it like in this case, maybe a dealer issue? And like e-commerce, maybe that's shipping delay or out of stock or something like that. Which is totally different than expressing gratitude or sharing user-generated content or sharing that you got your dream car on a holiday or something like that. So we can now go to Monkey Learn. So sign up for an account here, and then we'll meet you in the next area where you can go to the My Models screen, and we're going to create a model. So the model type is a classifier. So there are 3 types of classifiers that I've been alluding to. The first one is that classification. So we're going to create our own categories. We're going to train the model and then run our file for it. And so we only clicked, 25 or 50 guesses to train the model, and then it'll take the rest of our data and apply it. And then we could bring in any data later. We could, in a month, come back, bring all that data back in, and it's going to run it across that AI. So AI solves that for us, and we will be good to go. So the other 2 things we could do are sentiment analysis. So taking that same tweet text and using an AI model to determine whether that's negative, neutral, or positive. So either those 3 labels of a word, or sometimes you get a score of like -1 for negative, 0 for neutral, and 1 for positive. So it could be like -0.4 for medium negative to positive 0.4 and something like that, because it judges the language of that tweet as positive or negative. So sometimes that's not going to be super accurate. Obviously, there's the subtlety of human communication and sarcasm and reading between the lines, and this kind of AI model is super simple. So take it with a massive truckload of salt, not just a grain of salt. And these things will obviously improve over time as all of these models are trained, like we've been seeing with DALL-E and all those other things on imagery and so many other text writing AI as well, and suggestions and things like that. So just kind of a fun thing to be able to see. Are there patterns in what we say? Are we just like super more positive in our language than our competitors? Like, is there a negative tone to our customer service emails or what our customers are saying? But that is a good distinction too. Is it the sentiment of the brand's tweets, like on their timeline, or the sentiment of our replies, or separately, the sentiment of customers' replies, which you'll see in a lot of like customer experience tools and analytics about surveys and everything like that. Customer sentiment is more closely related when you're talking about marketing and like brand sentiment, how they feel about the brand. It's kind of more along those lines than like the sentiment of what we are communicating in our language, in our texts, and our communications. Also, the customer has like an intent. So are they complaining about something? Are they requesting something? So like an actual service request, they need to follow up on something, on a service appointment or an order, like in e-commerce. Are they out of stock and they need you to be put on a list, or that you need to follow up and find your order that's lost in Nebraska? Or is it product feedback? So if you tweet Amazon, for example, on Alexa and like tweet the new feature that has all of these suggestions that no one asked for, it keeps saying them, and then you have to turn it off every day. There's no way to turn it off permanently. So a lot of people, including myself, are tweeting that, but they're taking it as some sort of a customer service request. And it's like, it's not a customer service request. I need you to communicate that 1,000 people want the product manager to get that information and change the product. So that's a very different set of things to go to different people on different teams. So if you're able to look at these intent classifications, you could route it to the different teams or analyze it and everything there, which I hope they're doing because they need to fix that. So long story short, we are going to the first one, classify these into these categories using the Excel file, pop in there, take your shortened Excel file to the number of rows that you can do. The first row is discarded. Those are just the column field titles. And you're going to use this column. So this is the Twitter tweet text. So that is an alliteration in a nutshell there. But here is our text, and that's all we need to do. It's going to keep the rest of that data there in those other columns. That's fine. It's just not going to touch them. It's doing all the work on this column and applying the model there. So we're going to click continue. So as it imports the data, if you have more than the allowed amount of data for the model in your account, it will hang here for a second. It'll eventually give up and give you an error message. Just go to Excel, reduce those rows, delete them that are above the max that it allows you to train the model. In my case, the 3,000 is the max, and so anything over that I would have to delete. And then this will be a successful confirmation here. So got just under 3,000, told me the duplicates are removed, was 23. So cool. We're on to the next page here. So now we're going to define those tags. So we're thinking about those categories. So I'm going to try to think of those 4 to 6 categories of things that I want to do more or less of that will apply to both of these brands and see how that can work. So I am going to go with concept cars, racing, user generated content, SUVs, sedans, supercar, and vintage retro. It's redundant, but maybe those throwback posts are kind of like that. See if there's any promotions and go from there. So we don't have to have everything here. This is just a start. We can edit it as we go and we train the model, but get a few there. If there, and these are probably too many, we'll see what happens. I'm just going to click continue. So now we're training the model. So there's a difference between we're training the model and then we're going to run it. So we're going to have the same data to run the model on today, but the second one for the second brand will run through the same thing, and you could run it on the future on the same model. So we've got our tags on the right. So there's 2 modes. You can click that change pencil to put it in the change mode, and you can do the plus and add a new one. So maybe we do product announcement and hit enter. Okay. So what's going to happen is it's going to start to learn how the model is working. But this is, okay, this is racing for sure. So I'm going to click racing, confirm. That is a reply. So I didn't have replies on here. I'm not really focused on replies in what I was talking about so far. So I'm just going to put them all under replies. If replies were my focus and I was like really working on customer service, I would do those different categories that I was talking about here with like thank yous, apologies, maybe dealership issues in this case, or request for user-generated content. So let's pop back to Monkey Learn, and we're going to call that replies. So enter as that new one's there. Click check, confirm. So it's going to want to train here for 40 for me. Sometimes it's a little bit different depending on your data set size. It's asked me between 25 and 50. So you just got to kind of rock through these really quick. It looks like a reply real quick. Reply. Getting a lot of replies. It can take multiple. replies in a row. Well, there you go. More racing. That was like the same tweets. Same tweets. Front of us. More racing. Fender out. Yeah, motorsports is all racing. All right. All right, so now that you are done training your model, you can name it. So I'm just going to call this Emotive Twitter. All right, there we go. So you could keep training it if you want. I'm done training it for now. That was painful. We're going to click test it, and cool. So you could actually type whatever you want in here and see what it would do. So if I put rolling in the 6 in Cali, see what happens. See if we can run it on a bash file and maybe it'll work there. A little skeptical now based on our results, but let's see what happens on that column like we did before. It is the same file. In reality, you're probably going to be doing other files, but we were just training the model at first, and there are obviously 2,850 for it to train. So now we have a new file that it downloaded here called process bash. I'm going to bring that up here. And we should have, at the end of our data, if we go there, it looks like they skipped a few columns, but you'll see 2 new columns. You'll see classification and confidence. So the confidence that it's correct that classification is there. So they're 54% confident that this is a reply based on the training. It is a reply. Nice work, model. So using that, it's more of like an internal thing. So if I'm going to graph this in Tableau, the filter, I might say like only graph things that you're like at least 50% sure that are there. But the presentation and who I'm showing that graph to, it really, whether I tell them I'm that confident or not, depends on the audience. It's usually more of something that I'm filtering it by, and that might be something small in the definition somewhere. So think about the context of how you're presenting that data and what it means. But here are our classifications. So a lot of replies, sport models. Looks pretty good. All right, so we completed that. So we actually have our categories for our main brand in those suites. And we'll look at it some more once we're in Tableau. But what we also need to do is run the model for a sentiment analysis for both our brand and another competitor. In this case, we'll pull in some Lexus as well. But let's pop in there off of Twitter and get into Monkey Learn again. And instead of the model that we created for classifying the tweets, we're going to go to My Models again, create a new model, and we're going to do, it's another classifier, but it's that second option, like I was talking about, a sentiment analysis. So whether the language of the tweets from our account, in this case, are positive, negative, or neutral. So popping in there. So I actually want to open up that process bash file since we already have some information in there for Acura in this case. They added those 2 extra columns, but they skipped 3. So I like my data nice and clean. I want to make sure Tableau doesn't forget about those extra ones way there at the end. So I'm going to highlight those 3 columns, click delete, and make sure that that's there. So we have our classification now, that new column, and confidence as well. So I'm going to save this as Acura processed. All right. So let's go ahead and close that. And we're in our new model. We're going to browse that file and find where that is downloaded. So Acura processed is what mine's called. And again, just like with the classification model, that same field that we're going to use to judge whether something is positive, negative, or neutral is that tweet text. And continue. All right. I am running up on my max credits for my account. So again, be sure you are only using the number of rows divided by the amount of tasks you have to do. So in this case, we're looking at one main brand account, and we're going to use it twice plus one competitor account. So that's 3. So I divide whatever credits you have up by 3, maybe do it a little bit less for each one. So that way you can divide it across these 3 tasks before it resets your account. So sounds good. We've got this, and now we're in training mode again, but instead of training it on what category to put it in for those posts, we're training it on whether it's negative, neutral, positive. So it's already got kind of an idea on a lot of things. So you'll see we only need to do 12 this time, thank goodness. We're happy we could help. We hope you found some that are to your liking. I don't know, it's probably, I guess that's happy. It's kind of neutral. I'm going to go with that. We're thrilled. I'm going to go with positive there. Great show of effort. Positive. Trophy, that's positive. Think of anything, but let's test it. All right, cool. So here's what it's supposed to look like when you're doing the test, where you can put it. It gives you a little sample text from one of the tweets. It says, "We're happy we could help." It judges that as positive. Put that was a beautiful picture of the one and your NSX. See what happens. Classified text. Positive, 80%. There you go. How about, I'm sorry the EX isn't released yet and you're mad. Still thinks it's positive, but the confidence did drop to 56.2%. So maybe not perfect, but we'll give it a go. So go ahead and take that batch, open up your file. In this case, we're going to use first the Acura one, the first brand, and then also run it on your second brand. But same deal that we were doing with the training. And now analyze that data. All right, so now it's processed again. So this is our final Acura file. Let's go over to the right. So now you've got a second confidence column, which is going to be confusing. So we're going to call that sentiment confidence. So you're going to have to change that on the second brand as well, so that you don't confuse the confidence of the classification with the confidence of the sentiment. So sentiment confidence, because they have to match exactly. So there you go. It's got that all there. So this is our final Acura information. So we're just going to save this as Acura final. And now I'm going to go back here. We're going to process that new batch, and we're going to bring in the data for Lexus. And we're going to keep these as 2 separate files. So the brand 1 and the brand 2 will be separate. Lexus didn't do the classification on it. We'll just do the sentiment on it. But right now they're 2 separate files. In Tableau, we're going to combine them together in a way that we haven't done yet on the channel. All right. Processing. All right, data friends, before we hop into Tableau, what we need to do is look at the Excel file that we processed through Monkeylearn. So this file will actually have both of the data fields that we processed, because we did a classification by a category, and we also did a classification by sentiment. So you can process that same file through again twice. One thing to look out for, though, Tableau, when it looks for those different data fields, if they have the same name, it thinks it's the same thing. So I don't want to have any confusion. We can fix that in Tableau later, but so that classification here, you could put classification category if you want, or whatever it is. So that second one, you could put just sentiment maybe, and that would do that as well. So as long as they're different and you know what they mean, all good. That confidence for that first one is the confidence that the category is correct, and that second one is confidence that the sentiment is correct. So name it whatever you would like, as long as it is different, and you should be good to go. I am noticing a couple things in Excel. It thinks that is a text. You could fix that right here while you are in Excel if you want. You can highlight all the way down there and convert it to a number. It's a text, so we're going to fix that when we get into Tableau. So let's go ahead and save this as our data. And now we can go ahead and connect to it in Tableau, bring in that final accurate data that we have, and drag that tweets table there. So that other table is just going to be Accura's profile info repeated, since this is just about their tweets. So we just need that first table. We're going to go through here like we normally do and clean up anything that is not the correct data type. So that is our universal time zone data there. So those are date times, since it has the hours, minutes, and seconds as well. Noticing these are whole numbers, so you can only have a whole number of favorites. You can't have like 5.2 favorites. That's not how it works. So we want whole numbers for those. And that was just because the data format in Excel thought it was text, so it stored that in the file like that. The rest here looks good. This is also a whole number, and this is a whole number as well for mentions. And we can go through here. Let's see, confidence. Now that is a decimal number, since it has a series of numbers after that and a decimal number there as well. So I think we should be good to go. We'll see what happens on the sheet. We will have to highlight those. I'm going to click Control on my keyboard and make sure I have those numbers that are measures and move those with the right click to measure. Now, if we didn't do that in the data source tab here with the data type thing, you could also right click here on, well, language is not a number. Let's make sure we convert that to a string. These you can also change data type within this view as well. So there's the number, decimal, and whole. Cool. So let's make a couple graphs and get out of here. So we could do a few different things. I'm thinking actually I want to do a calculation first because we have the number of favorites. So I want to know what are those favorites doing on those tweets by the category that we actually have now. So we don't just know in general, like, yeah, we have this number of favorites. It's always good to think of a ratio. So you have the number of favorites and you have the number of times you posted. So the tweets count there will tell us how many times we posted by each category. So if we put that classification category up here, we will see the number of times we have posted in that. So I'm also noticing here, since that AI model allowed us to classify things as multiple categories, it does make it a little bit messier to graph. So I'm actually going to do something a little bit differently before I do this. And in that classification category, I'm going to right click that, transform, and do a custom split like we've done often before. And that colon was what separated each multiple term there. And I'm going to move that to 2 columns. So instead of looking at all of them that are tagged to each one of those tweets, I'm just going to look at the first one and just assume that that's the best category for it. If it's not, this isn't science here. I'm just trying to get a basic read for everything. So it's a little bit more exploratory, and that's okay. So now I'm going to drop that in here, and it's got the count of the tweets. So now you can actually see what we have sorted a little bit so you can see the most. So that's replies is the most there. Maybe I make this a bar chart. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-B, make the bar chart a lot bigger so you can see it better. So can everyone else. And I'm going to click Control on my keyboard on that classification, drop it on label, keep Control on my keyboard, and drop the number of tweets there. So this one is number of tweets by category or classification or whatever you would like, some language like that. And I'm going to make that label a little bit more bold and larger, and might even make it match the color there so I can see how it lines up. Since it doesn't perfectly line up there, I could work with formatting a little bit, but you can easily see replies are that, and user-generated content's one of those smaller slices. So it's kind of good that it has that color there because I know it's not those teal ones. Awesome. So the number of tweets by category. But what I was saying too is like we want to move towards a ratio. So this is what we have been posting, but what does that do to the other metrics? So I'm going to do a calculated field there. And actually, let's duplicate this. While I'm out here, I actually do like to make multiple versions of graphs. So I'm going to exclude replies. So I duplicated, and now I can say exclude. So those are two different scenarios, like that customer service versus like the brand marketing team and the social media team posting those posts. And we probably want to evaluate those teams separately. And maybe, overall there's sort of a brand sentiment and everything guiding everyone. That's cool. But it's probably two separate conversations where we're talking about that. And I want to see really what these other things are. And since the replies are dominating the conversation overall in these types of tweets, I want to see what this breakdown is here. So that's great. All right. So number of tweets by category. I'm going to put excluding replies. All right, very cool. So another thing we can do, like I was mentioning before I got sidetracked, was let's create a calculated field and let's bring that in and let's call this favorites per post and do sum of favorites divided by count. What do I have on count here? I can just drag and drop that there. I'm not sure. See, so count is already an aggregate function, but favorites isn't. So you have to put the sum around it. So this should be valid. Make sure you check that little thing in the box there. It'll give you a red text there if it's not valid, and it might tell you to put a sum before favorites, and count's okay. So that is a perfectly valid calculation. So now we can bring our categories up here and bring our new calculation favorites per post here. Can flip it around however that makes sense, sort it, and null, so it didn't get a classification for a lot of those. This may be a good internal thing to keep on when you're looking at the graph and be like, oh, I didn't classify it enough, so maybe I need to go back and do some different categories. But if I'm going to present this to executives or whatever, maybe I don't have the null there. I'm just evaluating the tweets that I know are those categories. So there you go. We've got the favorites per post. So leading is user-generated content. So favorites per post. And what I want to drive to is something that's less data sounding. So like, what's a human question? Like what types of content drives the most favorites on Twitter? So how can we have this a question that a viewer is looking at our graph and they're like, what am I supposed to get out of this graph? Like, instead of using their brain power, searching through every category, looking at the different axes and like thinking about it, you're just teeing it up for them. They're like, what types of content drives the most favorites? Here, user-generated content. They know within a second or two. That solves a lot of your problems. Your meetings will go smoothly. They'll be fun, and they start to move towards data storytelling when you're able to bring something like that, either a question or a statement. If you already want to call it out, you could just say user-generated content drives the most favorites per post. And then they're just looking at the graph to back that up, so they have trust in your assertion that it's backed in data and true. So that's pretty fun. I'll always kind of format it a little bit and get the right sizes and everything. And classification category split 1, that sounds too robotic. You could either hide that, you can rename that, whatever works well for you. Generally err a little bit more towards minimalism, but make sure you have enough on the screen that they know what to expect from the data and all of that. So let's see if we could even do something a little bit different. So I'm going to, one, let's get off a default color. Always get off the default colors, and we'll just make that look a little better. Maybe put a label on it there. And could even do the same thing, match the mark color, make it bold. Tableau book's not too bold on its own. You might want to use a different font there. Remember, you can also choose different alignment. It could be in the middle, could be on the left, could be on the right, like that was. So go ahead and do that. Sometimes I find it easier, and kind of the user principle around looking at something together, where I'm looking at the text for user-generated content, and then I want to look at the number right after it's right there. But your eye is going left to right, and so you may just like look at the length of the bar and it's right at the end. So kind of work with that and maybe test it with your users when you're getting feedback and try to see if that helps them understand it faster and which way is the best for them. All right, so I'm going to duplicate that also. Now we have the classification types, but we haven't brought in sentiment. So I'm actually pretty curious if we can bring in sentiment there and see what happens. So now I brought it in on the graph itself. I'm also going to control click it on my keyboard and drop it into color. So now they're side by side. You can rearrange everything in Tableau, of course, and see what works best for you. So if you just wanted to know what the best neutral tweets were, this would be the best view, and the best positive tweets, because then you go to the first. But actually, I'm kind of, looking at each category and evaluating it and seeing what the effect of positivity or neutral language is on that tweet. Again, this is not perfect science. The AI model is not perfect at determining whether it's positive or negative, but I'm just trying to figure out if it's something that we should look at. And so looking here, user-generated content was the top one. And if it was more positive language tweet that was detected by the AI, it looks like it's getting even more favorites per post. So you're really efficient at driving more tweets if you use positive language, about that user-generated content that followers were providing you with. So that's pretty interesting to know. So you can get at least 75 more tweets per those posts if you are more positive, which is why we saw a lot of that language with love and other things like that in the text. Looks like it really does work. And so it may work differently per those categories. Let's see if we have any ones that are stronger. Looks like we do. On sport models, the positivity doesn't land as well. So that more marketing, we have this A spec model, this S spec model, type S, that is faster and everything. So maybe they just want to stick to the speed and the technical ability and make it more neutral on that tweet. So I don't really know. We could obviously do a more in-depth deep dive on that, but that is what would tee up a hypothesis for that. So this is a perfect example of how you can start to do an analysis on that and have conversations with the team. So obviously look at the actual content before you start making recommendations and all that sort of thing. But this is a great starting point because there is a difference between neutral and positive tweets there. All right, let's do a few more and go from there. All right, so favorites per post, let's do that by category. But does positivity have an effect? You probably just have one of the two questions there. All right, so I want to do a graph like we sometimes do of bubble graphs where they have all of the individual tweets. And so you do that by having your unique ID for a tweet. So I'm going to bring that into detail. So we have an individual bubble instead of just a sum of everything. We want to look at all the individual tweets. So let's do that, and let's do this over time. So we're going to bring in our exact date for that universal time. And let's also do a few other things. So let's bring in sentiment on color. And let's see if we can do a bubble chart yet. No, we need a measure. So let's do a sum of the favorites. Let's just see what are driving favorites in total. So now we have favorites by sentiment 2019 to 2023, over time or whatever it is. And if you were publishing it, you could put the profile name. So this is at Acura there. Awesome. So this is one way to look at it. UTC is not a user-friendly name unless you're talking to a technical audience. So you want to clean up those axes. That is favorites, but we have favorites up in the title. So this is actually kind of optional if you're going to have that title there. So I'm going to clean that up. I also want to make retweets. So I'm going to drop into size and exaggerate that. So now we have the number of favorites is the higher it goes, and the size is the number of retweets. And let's make that positive a different color, and neutral maybe a neutral color, and apply. I can even lower the opacity a little bit. So this is interesting. Now we have some huge standouts. So I want to know what those are. Now you also have two ways of doing this. These are all intermingled, both of the sentiment types, neutral and positive. It's kind of hard to tell here which one is which. So maybe I want to pull that out. So you can do control on your keyboard again and bring sentiment on here. So it's both the color and also on your axes if you would like. And I can hide that top part because it's kind of self-explanatory. So we have neutral and positive broken out here. So your call really depends on your data and what it looks like and what you want to call attention to. Here I can see they're mostly the same, but at least I can see a little bit of difference here. So there's kind of a bigger breakout here and the bigger breakout here. So let's go ahead and annotate those. But I don't think I have the text in yet, and that's what I really want to know, because that's what's important that we're kind of evaluating. So I'm going to drop text into that detail. So that is now available if I'm going to do a label or a tooltip, or I'm going to right click on this and annotate it, and annotate that mark. And it has all this stuff. It's very data focused. So actually right now, I actually just want the text, and I don't need someone to tell me text, text. We just are going to take that text. We don't need the ID. That's not user friendly. We don't need UTC. You could put that date there, but you can kind of see what year it is below. I just want to call out the content and then the favorites and retweets. And I kind of don't like that data view. So let's just say favorites. If you're with a casual group, could be faves, whatever you want to do there, but make sure your audience matches that level of casualness or professionalness, and retweets. And let's make that huge. So let's make favorites just huge, because that is going to be pretty impressive. Maybe make that bold. Even make it the brand colors that you're doing, whatever that is. So now we have spring 22. We have that. We can format it, change the color, add a border, add some corners, some rounded corners, add a line, make a line and an arrow, and there you go. So something's happening, spring 2022. I bet I know what that is. It's probably also this, and we're going to do the text there. So maybe we just do the text in that like we did before. I don't want to do all the formatting since you're watching right now. We'll just do a little example here. Oh, we don't have the text. We need to drop that back in there. Click OK. There you go, a generational shift. We have the all-new Integra. So that was big news. It has been a long time since the Integra was in production, and they clearly have a lot of fans in that type of market. That is a terrible color. We'll try to mix it up here and make some rounded corners and change some different things there. So make sure that's a readable annotation. But now we've got a little bit of an overall view of the positivity and the negativity of the tweets. So they said spring 22 was neutral. Yeah, that's pretty neutral. And a generational shift, like that sounds pretty, hyperbolic, so exaggerated. They're kind of reading that as positive, but that is a difference. So like, there's a lot of different timing things and other variables going on here on which would drive more favorites or not. But this does drive that conversation of, how do you want the tone to sound in the text of the content? And now you have two breakout examples, and you have some patterns you can discuss. So now we have a deeper conversation than just likes as a summary. We have this, and you could, instead of doing the sum of the favorites, you could do favorites per post instead, and maybe pull that in and have that discussion on which is more efficient versus what drove all of your audience to give you that total number of tweets. So that's a pretty fun one you can do. Let's see if we can do one more. Let's bring in our sentiment at the top, and let's do media type and classification. So let's get all of our new data and see what we can do. And that's our classification that we broke off just the first one, and exclude null. And now we can choose whatever metric we want. So let's think about retweets. I want to know what's being amplified out there. So I'm going to drop that in. This is just a simple table. Let's do a highlight table. So I'm going to drop that sum of retweets there onto color. And it just changed the text, which could work for you if that's what you want. You can change this automatic to square. And now we have a highlight table. We can pick a different gradient. And can even make this a little bit bigger. Something too, when you're presenting, if you're just looking at the trends and the numbers don't matter, you can actually, you don't need to have the numbers there. So now I know a photo with no classification. So that's null again. I'm not a huge fan of these nulls because it's not telling us exactly what's important. So maybe photos for the car sport models, like the Type S or the A spec for Acura, are the ones that are getting the most retweets. So maybe those announcements are pretty exciting. Racing does pretty good, but it looks like business news, looks like your mostly your followers on average are not really caring about your sales numbers. That is a totally different audience, and they probably should have a more corporate account pulling that, is my guess. So that's where these kind of conversations help us determine what should be posted on the main account. So we've got an insight already there. So let's say retweets by category and sentiment. That's pretty fun. You can also choose to, instead of having all, maybe it's just the min and max. So now instead of having a lot of numbers that give you a headache and you have to go take an ibuprofen or Tylenol just to make it through looking at these graphs, now you can be like, all right, there's the highest one, and of course you can just do the max instead of the minimum, and that's per each of those categories. So 7's the highest number of replies for an animated GIF, or 1531 for the sport model. So that's another thing you can do. So we've got a great start to graphing our AI modeled sentiment and categories of classifications, because we want to know what we should post more or less of, or at least where to start exploring that with all of our different teams and create better performing brands and help our careers as well. All right, so give that a